Hello and welcome to this chess club game review entitled Dangerous Knights. And today I have two games, both at a local chess club where I played against a really good player named Mike. And so in this first game, I had the black pieces, he had white, and it began with e4, e5, and then he played bishop to c4. And since lately I've been trying to learn new openings, I couldn't remember exactly what I was supposed to play against this. So I played knight to f6, and it turns out that was the right move. There's other moves available, but this was the move in my opening repertoire, but I couldn't quite remember how to follow up here, especially after he played this. So it looks like I should have just captured this pawn with, e takes d4, and then the computer recommends that white should just jump out here with the knight and put more pressure on this pawn, and then maybe something like this, and then it could get crazy if I capture. They capture, and then I retreat back here to block the queen's path to this g-pawn, so I can get ready to develop this bishop and castle. So at this point, that's what I should have played, but I guess I didn't capture this pawn. Let's see if we go back here. After d4 was played, I did not capture that pawn because I was thinking, well, will he start chasing my knight around with this e5 move? But it looks like here I should just play d5, counterattacking his bishop, something like that. So, I don't know, tricky lines. So let's see what actually happened in the game. So if I go back to the beginning, so e4, e5, bishop to c4, this bishop's opening, and I played knight to f6, and then once d4 is played attacking my pawn, I couldn't remember what to play, and I play this mistake here. So if you can see why this is not a great move, because it allows capture, which is what my opponent did, and then I recapture, which is best. And then now my opponent, looks like the computer recommends immediately capturing the queen here. And then your king would have to capture and the bishop could snatch up this pawn. But the second best move was played, capturing immediately. And of course, I don't want to, well, this is where I was mistaken. I thought, well, if I capture the bishop, I'll lose my queen, but apparently that's the best move. So I played this move, which is a mistake, because it allows capture, capture, and then this bishop can just roam free, which is what happened in the game. But I wanted to take a look at this other option. It looks like you can actually capture this bishop like this. And then if they pick off your queen, there's bishop to b4 with check and a discovered attack on the queen. So here, the best thing to do is to just retreat the queen back to d2, blocking this check. Then, of course, you would pick that off. And now computer recommends capturing with the knight because then you protect this pawn that's under attack by the knight. And so what do they recommend? Computer just recommends developing your knight, and then f3, which keeps this knight out in case my knight jumps forward to try and pin the king and the rook. The king can move over. But this f3 move prevents the knight from moving forward and threatening a fork over on this side. So, in the game, I move up. Mike captures my queen, I capture back, and then he pins the knight, which is a mistake. It looks like f3 would have been better. But his idea behind this is that he's ahead by a pawn, and so I assume he wants to start trading off material, trading off pieces, where I need to trade off pawns. So once he goes here, let's see, a better move, the computer recommends f3 instead, and that then black should develop bishop to c5. But in the game, we had this pin on my knight, which is attacking the pawn here. And so I play h6, forcing him to make a decision, and he captures, giving up the bishop pair. So I have the bishop pair, but I'm down a pawn. So, of course, white is ahead here by 0.86. And I thought, well, I just have to hang in there and see what I can do being a pawn down. So if you're down a pawn, you want to trade off as many remaining pawns as you can, but avoid trading pieces. So that's what I try to do. He plays knight to c3. And here I just play this move, which the computer likes, says that this is best, keeping that knight out of my position. And now my opponent castles long here to the queen side with a check on my king. The computer actually prefers a knight move here instead. And now I make a mistake. I developed my king the wrong way, and I wasn't sure which way to go in this game. I figured, well, he has a pawn majority over on the the king side, so I should keep my king over there and help fight this pawn majority. But I guess it did block in my bishop, so that's bad. On the upside, I'm attacking his bishop, and he's forced to retreat. But it looks like the computer recommends moving the king to c7 instead. And then, let's see. Well, interestingly enough, they recommend f4 here, which, looks like that gives up a pawn. But if I capture, then I would have these terrible doubled pawns, just doubled isolated pawns plus this isolated pawn. A lot of weaknesses over here. So in the game, I went the wrong way with my king, and my opponent responds with an inaccuracy, retreating his bishop back this way. The computer recommends going the other way, but he wanted to keep an eye on the middle of the board here. So I see why he did that. I just developed my knight, thinking now I can jump up and attack his bishop, perhaps. So he plays a3 here, leaving an escape route for the bishop in case my knight attacks it. But the computer recommends, well, first the computer says that's an inaccuracy, and it recommends knight to f3 instead. So then it recommends that black continue with this plan, attacking the bishop, and now knight to h4, getting ready to possibly jump to f5, but more importantly, threatening this fork, knight to g6, forking the king and the rook. So here the recommendation is to knock out that bishop. White would capture towards the center, although the computer now is saying that capturing away from the center might be better. So now it's good to just move here, eyeing this pawn. And so, maybe g3, bishop develops. The knight jumps in here, and we should go ahead and just get rid of that knight. But we give up our bishop pair, and it doubles their pawns. So now the recommendation is just to attack this pawn. And it looks like you would get your pawn back, perhaps, here. So in the game, we had a3. leaving an escape route for the bishop. And so the game continues with knight to c5, attacking that bishop. The bishop retreats, and now a5. Because I thought, well, if he pushes forward attacking my knight, I can just go ahead and capture, attacking his knight. And if he moves, I could pick off this pawn, but also the bishop would be unprotected. So my opponent moves here, h3. The computer likes knight to f3 instead. So I go ahead and start pushing my pawns, trying to trade off some pawns because I'm down in material. So here, f3 to help protect this. If the knight is chased away, the pawn would be protected. Computer still prefers knight to f3. Then we have b4, and then this move, which looks crazy, but not so much because you're still, once again, that fork is threatened on the king and the rook here. So here, what is the recommendation? King to e8 to avoid that fork. All right. Let's see what happened in the game. After f3, b4 is played, exchanging off some pawns here. So my opponent retreats, and I go ahead and capture. And it looks like their best option here, they played b3, keeping things a little more closed on the king side. Computer says that's a mistake, that it would have been better to just go ahead and capture that pawn. And then after that, it looks like rook to b8 would have been best, taking control of that open file. And, you know, that's probably why my opponent didn't go into this line. He didn't want this rook, you know, threatening to just control a lot of territory leading up to the king. And here the recommendation is g3 and then push this h-pawn for black. All right, but in the game we have this move, keeping things a little more closed. But now, material-wise, we are even. So 6 pawns to 6. But black has the bishop pair, so black is in the lead at this, at this point. All right, so now I played bishop to e6, just developing. The computer preferred h5, which would let me develop the other bishop with check. So my opponent develops his knight to g3, and the computer says that's an inaccuracy. Let's see here. An inaccuracy. And let's see what they recommended here. Looks like king to b1 is the best move according to the computer. And then black should just line up on the king there. And then after that, let's see. Oh, then they recommend knight to c1 here. Just bring the knight in, which maybe will help stop this pawn at some point. If the knight moves to c1, the king moves over, maybe letting this bishop reposition, and then the knight might be able to jump in here. I don't know, a lot of maneuvering. So in the game, instead, this move is played. But now, it looks like the computer recommends rook to b8 as the best move. Let's see, rook to b8. And there's also rook to g8, which looks interesting. So in the game, I just pushed this pawn. But instead, it looks like... let's see. After knight to g3... rook to g8 is a possibility, because now if this knight moves, you can pick off this pawn. So the computer just recommends protecting the knight. And then what? Then finally you can play a4. So in the game, I just played a4 immediately. And then we had knight f5 jumping in with check here. All right, so check. The best thing to do would have been to just move the king to f7. And that would have kept a healthy lead for black. But instead, I captured the knight, giving up my bishop pair. So instead, the computer recommends that move. And then the other knight could develop. Then the rook lines up here. You know, something along these lines. I guess I didn't move there because I was thinking, let's see, once this is played, I don't know, I guess even if I moved here and the knight checked me, you know, I could still maybe pick it off with the other bishop. But I don't know. I didn't want to go into that line, so I decided to just knock the knight out of there because whenever the knights start, you know, this video is entitled Dangerous Knights, so you have to watch out. Once the knight starts hovering in, especially when it gets over to your side of the board, you want to be very wary and keep an eye on those knights, or they can, you know, cause problems with forks and everything else. So, you know, let's continue here. We have a recapture, and now I try to open up the area around his king. So I play the third best move, capturing. He recaptures. And now here is where I kind of go downhill. The best move would have been, let's see, h5, because now my bishop could go up here to h6 with check and control a diagonal. But, you know, they recommend this, check, king moves over, and then you line up on the king like this. The king would have to help protect this pawn, and then the knight repositions and gets ready to jump on white side of the board with a check. So, you know, something along those lines. But in the game at this point here, I wasn't sure what to do, and I thought, well, let me get this bishop out of the way, which was an inaccuracy. You know, once again, I should have pushed h4. Now we have knight to e2, developing his knight. And now I can bring my other bishop out of the, or excuse me, rook out of the corner now that I've moved my bishop out of the way. So I play this move, which was an inaccuracy. The computer recommends instead multiple moves. Let's see, h5 once again to develop that bishop. Rook at a to b8. Rook at h to d8, fighting for control of the open d file, which is a move I thought about, and you know, maybe I should have played that earlier in the game. So I go here, putting pressure on this pawn. The king moves down, but the computer didn't like that move so much. It instead wanted rook at h to e1, lining up on my king here. It says that is best. So, you know, here I could go ahead and capture. And instead of capturing with the bishop, which is blockading this pawn, the recommendation is this move, putting pressure on the knight, and then knight to d4 check. So then, after a capture, the pawn is pinned and cannot recapture, but we have rook to b2. The king would move. We can pick off the bishop that was blockading the pawn. And then this move is played, you know, capture, capture, and then the bishop, you know, tries, well, actually, now the computer's saying the king should have moved out of the way first. But with this bishop move, it'll prevent the rook from jumping down here to d6 and attacking your pawn. Although this rook could just move up and protect, and also threaten to push this forward. So anyway, that all of that line was overlooked. After this move, the king moves up, and let's see, I follow up with my own inaccuracy. Not knowing what to do with this bishop, it just turned into a mess the whole game. That's probably the biggest contributing factor to having problems in this game. But black is still ahead at this point. Instead of that move, the computer recommends knight to a6, retreating back and threatening to fork the king and the bishop. All right. So after this bishop move, the rook centralizes, which is best. And now I find this move retreating back, threatening to reposition forward into my opponent's side of the board with a fork of king and bishop. And so now my opponent decides to get his knight moving into the action. He's able to move here because of the rook pinning this pawn. But the computer prefers just g4 here instead. So now we have knight. Oh, and also, these dangerous knights that you have to watch out for. My opponent was threatening to capture this pawn with a fork of my king and the rook here. So, I play this knight to b4 move, check, although the computer recommended instead possibly king to d7 here. It says that's the best move. And I briefly looked at this in the game, but I thought it would be too ridiculous to put my king on an area where there's a discovered check. Once this knight moves, maybe he moves here. I thought my king would kind of be out in the open, but the computer says that's best. It even recommends knight to b5. And then the king moves back here. And then what? Knight to c3, just repositioning. So, dangerous knights. You definitely have to keep an eye on those knights, especially when they start heading into the center of the board or onto your side of the board. So, back to what happened in the game. The knight moves here. I move up to check and protect this pawn. The king steps back, which is best. And then I finally move my king, but once again it wants to go this way. And now the knight jumps into my side of the board on this nice outpost. And at this point I'm thinking, what am I going to do about this knight? And it really got me thinking. I guess it kind of caused me to panic, and I make a blunder. So I played rook to b7, blundering here. Now the computer says the best move for black to stay in the lead is rook to a5, which still allows the possibility of this check here on my king, but now the recommendation is just to go here, although now the computer's saying go the other direction there. And then the knight could just jump back up to e6 here, back to its outpost. So in the game I play this move, a blunder. And as soon as I moved it, I was thinking, maybe I should have moved the other rook up. Because now both of these rooks are on the light squares, that if this bishop ever manages to get out of here, that could cause problems, but that's not likely. Now here my opponent moved here, forking my king and the rook, forcing me, I'd have to capture, and I resigned here because I was disgusted that I just was so I don't know, frustrated, I guess, by this knight moving into my side of the board, and I wasn't sure what to do. And it looks like I should have just played on here because I'm only slightly behind. It looks like the best way forward would have been to capture. And then of course I'd lose my rook for that knight. And now we have bishop to e7, putting pressure on this rook, and the rook, should just retreat back. Now, if the rook retreats back to here, and I think we looked at this a little bit after the game, I was thinking, well, can I capture? And then, if the king captures, I can attack both of the rooks. But, the rook could just capture. So, that would be no good to go ahead and capture that bishop because the rook could just move out of the way and capture. It looks like, once again, a rook move up the side of the board might be better. And now it's also recommending bishop to c5. I don't know. That move I'm not sure about. Let's go back here. And now it's saying king to e8 as well, bishop to c5. So the computer is unsure how to continue here. Let's look at this move, king to e8. Okay, now it's saying that's best. So king to e8, and then f4, which is a little tricky. Now the computer doesn't like that. So, here if you capture, there's the threat of maybe piling up on this bishop. But no, it says that we can go ahead and capture that pawn. So now the computer's saying rook to e4 would have been better. So let's get rid of that f4 move. Delete that. And take a quick look at rook to e4. So we just go ahead and blockade the pawn. We're on a light square now, and we don't have to worry about this bishop. And there's a threat of moving over and attacking this isolated pawn. So here, rook to b5 is the recommendation. King over to c1. And now what? Bishop to c5 check. Or sorry, rook to c5 check. Now it's saying we should have just gone to the center. But anyway, it's saying the game is pretty even here. So I guess I shouldn't have gotten frustrated and quit the game and should have tried to play on. And it would have been a close game, but white probably had a slight edge. All right. Well, let's take a look at another game that involves some dangerous knights. So let me find... before we do, I'll take a look at the game review and see how the accuracy percentage came out. So here it's saying that white was in the lead and then black took the lead for quite some time before relinquishing it there at the end, before I resigned. So my opponent, Mike, played at 81% accuracy, so good job for him, and I played at 77.6. He had three brilliant moves, three great moves. Three great moves. And it looks like for inaccuracies, he had 5, I had 4. He had 4 mistakes, I had 3. But I had that blunder, and so I guess I should have played on instead of resigning. Okay, let's take a look at our second game that we played. Let's see here. Where I had the white pieces, and the game began with e4. And then e6 was the response. So the French defense So here you go ahead and just take control of the center with both your pawns, and black will respond with d5, the reason that they played this e6 move to fortify the d5 pawn push. And here you have different options. You can push the pawn forward, gaining space. You can capture this pawn, and then if they trade, it's kind of an equal center, and it opens the game up more because a lot of times the French defense can kind of have some closed positions with a lot of maneuvering. Sometimes you don't even castle because the center is blocked up and the kings stay in the center. Also, the other option is to develop the knight to protect the e-pawn that's under attack. So you can either go to knight to c3, but that blocks your c-pawn, or you can play this knight to d2, the Tarrasch variation, where you're just protecting the pawn with this knight, but you're not blocking your c-pawn. In case they push their c-pawn attacking, you can push yours to defend the d-pawn. But in the game, we have a capture. So I recapture, and now my opponent develops his knight. And apparently, Mike said that he saw this opening, this version of the French, on a Gotham chess video. And so this is why he played it. And we'll see how it turns out here. So I couldn't remember exactly what I should play. So I decided to pin here. I thought if I immediately captured the knight, it would just help him develop his queen, I guess. So I avoided that. I developed my bad bishop, which is on the same colored square as my central pawn. And I thought, well, I'll give up my bishop pair, but trade off that bad bishop for his knight. And so he breaks the pin. I go ahead, follow through with my plan, capturing with the bishop. And here, I thought he would probably capture with his bishop to avoid doubling his pawns, but instead he does that. He doubles his pawns, which will give his rook a nice line into my king side, and the game continues with c3 just to fortify my d-pawn. And now the rest of this opening, where you fianchetto your light squared bishop, because a lot of times in the French defense, the light squared bishops are a problem because they're blocked in by this e-pawn. So, what do you do with this bishop? You could try and go here to d7 and then to c6. But in this variation, you push the b pawn, and now you can develop to b7, or maybe sometimes to a6 if you want to trade off the light squared bishops. But then your knight could end up on the edge of the board here. So I decide to develop my queen, which probably wasn't the best move because now the game has swung in black's favor. The computer recommends just queen to f3, and then I could castle long here. And also queen to f3, might help protect this pawn. But I don't know. If he fianchettos, then my knight is kind of blocked, pinned to my queen. But that wouldn't work, because if my queen goes here and he follows through with the fianchetto, we can take a look at that. That is kind of interesting. So if my queen went here, there is a threat of capturing this pawn with check and picking off the rook. So computer says the best move is c6 to block the line of the queen. Same thing. If the bishop moves here, well, then you can pick off this pawn with check and then pick off the bishop with the queen. So now I see why the computer recommended that move. Some interesting tactics. All right. Instead, I check, which is not the best move. The computer says it's good, but the game is in black's favor now. So continuing on, my opponent blocks with the bishop attacking my queen. So I move here thinking maybe I can trade off the bishop pair. But the best move is played, c6, forcing my bishop to retreat. So I retreat to the center, although the computer likes bishop to e2 better. So now we have a6 being played. The computer says that's a mistake and now white is in the lead, but I see why my opponent played that. The computer recommends c5, but if that is played, well then this can be played. Once again, attacking the bishop. So my opponent probably wanted to keep his bishop pair. So instead, he played a6. Now the bishop, if c5 is played, the bishop can't go up here. Well, I guess the bishop can at this moment because the pawn is pinned to this rook. So in the game, I retreat back because I didn't want any surprises on my queen. But now, let's see, my opponent plays f5. Computer's saying this is a mistake, that it would have been better to play c5, and then you can capture and capture. My opponent probably didn't want to play this to end up with isolated pawns here. All right. f5 was played, attacking my knight. And my knight should have gone to g3. But I didn't do that. I went here, which was a miss. g3 would have been a better move. I was kind of worried about this pawn pushing forward, chasing my knight back even further. But this looks like that's the move I should have made. Knight to d2. The rook lines up on this unprotected pawn, so I push it forward. And now we have c5. And the computer is saying that's the best move here. But when I play it, now it's saying it's a mistake. And the computer actually likes king to f8 here. So why does the computer like that move? I don't know. I guess it gets the king out of the center of the board and it helps protect that rook maybe. I don't know. That move is looking suspect. It's a computer move that it's hard to find the answers on why you should play that sometimes when there's moves, mysterious moves like that. All right, so g3. And then this is played, trying to break open the center with my king stuck in the center, although my opponent is still in the center as well. So here, I overlooked a good move. I just captured, and that was a miss, putting the game back in black's favor. I had a better move that I overlooked. Looks like d5. So now the computer recommends b5, threatening to push the bishop back. Let's see. If they would have played that, well then we could capture, something to this effect. But in the game, I just, after they pushed, I captured. Bishop captures, and now f4 is played because I wanted to move my other knight up. This pawn was under attack, so this is the most obvious reason why I moved this. So I move up here because the pawn was under attack. The other bishop develops, attacking my rook. So I have to block that. So I move up, and the computer says this is a great move. But what else am I going to play? I have to move this knight up instead of the other one because now this rook is able to move. So bishop to e3 is played. The computer says that's good, but white is in the lead now. That knight to d7 would have been a better move. So I guess we could take a quick look at that. Knight to d7. And it's saying black would have a slight edge here, that we should play rook to f1, getting, breaking this pin of the knight to the rook, and then b5, and then we develop our knight to attack this bishop. But in the game, my knight develops up, blocking the line of the bishop on my rook. This bishop comes into the game on my side of the board, and I go ahead and move my rook out of that pin. The computer says that's a great move, but that's just a preventative move. I want to move that out of the way so I don't have to worry about the bishop lined up on it, preventing any future problems. So rook to a7 is played here. And I see why my opponent did that, to bring the rook into the center of the board. But the computer says that's a mistake, that b5 would have been better, limiting the scope of my bishop. And then I should just go ahead and castle queenside, and white would have a slight edge. But my opponent plays rook to a7. I go ahead and castle queenside, but now the computer says that's an inaccuracy, that instead I should have developed my knight to c4 here instead. And then capture, capture, retreat by the bishop, then castle. So something like this, and white would have had the lead. But in the game, I castle here, and my opponent plays this move, which the computer says is a mistake. Now, the reason this was played is because my opponent wants to bring the rook to the center and line up, in the center on this open file. But he moves this f-pawn up to prevent my knight from jumping up here, because if the rook and queen battery lined up on my rook, the only thing protecting, or on my bishop, the only thing protecting that is my queen. But I would be able to jump forward and protect the bishop and fork black's rook and bishop. So, this move was played to stop my knight from moving, one of these knights from becoming more dangerous by jumping onto the other side of the board. So let's see. The computer recommends, instead of that move, that after I castle here, the recommendation is bishop captures for black, capture with the queen, then pick off the other knight, capture, and the rook pins the bishop to the queen, but then the queen should just move out of the way here. But, I don't know, that's probably a good continuation. And white would be in the lead with this. We have 6 pawns to 6. But a bishop versus a knight with pawns on both sides of the board kind of favors the side with the bishop. And this rook is not doing so much here, whereas my rook, could reposition and double up here on this open d file. So in the game, we had f6, and then of course I follow that up with a miss. Moving my king off of the line of this pin, breaking or I guess getting rid of the pin. This bishop was pinning my knight to my king, so I wanted to move over so this knight would be free to move if it had to. But computer says that's a miss, that it would have been better to go ahead and immediately attack the bishop here. And then, capture, queen captures, and then, let's see here. The only thing about that continuation, it recommends bishop to e4, So that's kind of interesting, I guess. But what would happen if you would do that? Well, this would be a mistake that would allow a check with rook takes e6. Then the king would have to move, and then you could move your rook back here and protect this bishop. All right, so that wouldn't work. No rook to d7 there, so delete that move. Computer says the best thing to do is this, blocking the attack on the king. You would go ahead and capture. Queen would capture, and now knight captures is best. And then of course they would finally capture here. Rook captures, lining up on the king, but that gives you time for that move to protect, and then you double up, and then what? The king could jump down here and help protect that pawn. Something like that. All right, back to the game. So this is important here. I get rid of the pinning power of this bishop on the knight by moving my king over. And my opponent makes a blunder here, which is unfortunate. He goes ahead and captures. And in the game, we talked about this. It was just a blunder where he was thinking that the knight was still pinned. And I just moved unpinning this knight. So now if I capture, he played this thinking, oh, now my queen is trapped. But now that the knight is no longer pinned, I was able to just capture, then capture. And here the game ended after this. And so we go back. It looks like it would have been also good to either capture this bishop, or even start attacking the king with a check up here. So let's take a look at what my opponent should have done. And, once again, this was the case. If we go back a few moves, it's a dangerous knight. You have to really watch the odd moves that the knights can make. Here it was just a simple knight move that ruined everything because the knight's no longer pinned and can just foil black's plan by picking off this bishop here. Now, in the game, this was the blunder move. If we go back one, and we'll see what should have been played. So better would have been rook to d7 first. And then the computer says the best thing to do is move that bishop out of the way. And then capture. So computer says that's the best move, to give up your bishop pair, capturing the knight. Knight captures, and then bishop to d5, because the bishop was attacking this pawn. So let's go back and look at that. Excuse me. So we're looking at this continuation here, threatening to pick off this bishop. I thought, well, maybe I could retreat my knight as well and just protect the bishop. But it looks like it's even better to just move the bishop, attacking this unprotected pawn. And then bishop captures. Now here, they don't recommend capturing here, which would fork two rooks. Does that even work at all? Let me take a look at that. What if you go here? Well, this would just be a mistake, because now we have what? Bishop. Oh, okay, of course. The threat that we looked at earlier, pinning the queen to the rook here. So not a good move. All right. Bishop captures. And now the threat is renewed here of the bishop pinning the queen. So you capture with the knight. Now this is a little tricky. So here the best move is king to e7 or bishop to d5. What if the rook were to capture? Okay, that doesn't work because then the queen can just capture, getting out of this threat of the bishop pinning the queen. Okay, so bishop to d5 is recommended, but now it's saying it would have been better to move the king up. I don't know. Then you could have a threat of possibly pinning that pawn to the king. All right. We capture. They capture with the rook. Knight jumps up into the position. And the game might, continue with these type of moves here. Check. Block. And now this is interesting. You move up, but you don't capture because now you have a pinned rook and you just threaten to capture here. But the king can just move forward to e7 or f7 and protect that pawn. All right, well, let's see if there's anything else we want to look at. I mean, we'll just go back and look at this. So, capture. My opponent thought there was a pin, but unfortunately, the knight was covering and was able to capture. So another example of how these knights can be dangerous if they're overlooked. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Feel free to leave comments or suggestions, and also any requests if there is something you'd like to see in the future. So thanks for watching and have a super chess day.